All right, welcome back, economists. We're here to think about our first topic when it comes to the general topic of elasticity. We're going to talk about three different types. We're going to introduce what elasticity is to this video, and we're also going to think about our first type of elasticity, which is price elasticity of demand. Now, the other two types we're going to talk about for the general idea of elasticities is income elasticity of demand and price elasticity of supply. This video, as you might be able to tell, is about PED. But before we get into what PED is, let's maybe think for a second about what this word elasticity means. A good synonym for elasticity would be like responsiveness, right? Responsiveness to a force, right, in a physical sense. Some things are going to respond a lot, some things are not going to respond very much. So a good synonym for elasticity is like a rubber band. Here's a rubber band. It's just a little thing. And if I want to get this rubber band to bend, I don't really have to try that hard, right? A little bit of force and a big difference, okay? This is a very elastic rubber band, and we're going to try to connect this to some goods that we can think about in economics. So not a lot of force, big change. But if we use a rubber band that looks like this, right, this is a very inelastic rubber band, as if I want to get this thing to bend, I really got to put some force on there, and with a whole lot of force, it hardly moves at all. Okay, so that's a very inelastic rubber band. It's a ratio of force to change, right? So if we're thinking about what does that mean for demand, the price change we're trying to consider is the force, right? The price change is going to affect a good differently depending on its characteristics. So we calculate price elasticity of demand by dividing the change in quantity demanded by the price change, right? So the price change is the force, and that is me pulling on the rubber band, right? That's the force exhibited to the thing. And then quantity demanded is what we're trying to measure as the change as a result of the force. Okay, so far we've been talking a lot about demand, but we have been talking about it in terms of unit elastic demand. Or in other words, we've been drawing a demand curve that basically has a 45-degree downward slope. Okay? Now, what this means is unit elastic demand just simply means the percentage change in the price is equal to the percentage change in the quantity demanded. So a good word to think about this is proportionate. We will have a proportionate price change to a quantity change. Let's say we have an increase in price. From the law of demand, we can know that the price is going to go up and the quantity demand is going to decrease, right? So in this case, let's say we have a 25% increase in the price. If we have unit elastic demand, we will have a 25% decrease in the quantity demanded. Okay, negative 25% price change, right? So we're always going to have a negative number when we calculate PED. That's because of the law of demand. As the price increases, the quantity demanded decreases. Okay? So this is unit elastic demand. The price change is proportional to the quantity change. However, we do have some goods out in our world that are inelastic. They're like this rubber band. If we're trying to measure the impact of a price change, we need a very large change in price to get a small change in quantity demanded. Okay? So some goods that have inelastic PED, here are our determinants here: substitutes, necessity, percentage of income spent, and time. If something doesn't have a lot of substitutes, of which oil applies, right? We do have a few forms of renewable energy, but for the most part, the world's economies run off of oil. There's not a lot of substitutes. There are some, but they're not very available. And the other one is the extent to which something is a necessity. We have to be able to move around, right? Goods and services need to move around in addition to people also need to move around. The other one there is percentage of income that something is, and time. We're not really going to get into those. Those don't really apply to the market for oil. But if something is inelastic, it's going to have a very steep slope for the demand curve. All right, so our demand curve is not going to look like this, right? We need to show that a very large price change here will have a very small impact here. Okay, so we're going to show that with a very steep demand curve there. So let's say we have a price for oil at a price of 1, and then we have a quantity of 1. Let's say there's a huge spike in oil prices. Let's say the price goes up by, let's call it 50%. Okay? The price goes up 50%. From the law of demand, we can know that there will be fewer units of oil demanded, but there won't be that big of a change in response to the price because there aren't really that many substitutes for oil. If people want to look for another energy source to consume besides oil, they're not really going to be able to find one. And also, we need to move around, right? So it's to that extent, oil is a necessity. So in response to a 50% price change, maybe we only have a decrease in quantity demanded by 10%. Okay? So in this way, we'll have a PED number, right? Our percentage change in quantity demanded is 10. Our price change is 50. And that way, our PED value will be 0.2. Okay, so a 0.2 value for PED is greater than 1. It's less than 1. It's less than 1, and it's greater than 0. All right, so that is inelastic PED. So another good example of this would be like a prescription medication. In the United States, we have a lot of patents and things like that, and copyrights for drugs. So there aren't a lot of substitutes. Usually the government gives the legal right to make that product, and nobody else can make it, and there just aren't that many substitute products out there in the market. If you're on a prescription and you need that to live, so it's a necessity, those things are going to be inelastic. Okay, so the other two determinants there are percentage of income and time. So that plays in with our determinants because if we spend a lot of our income on something, it's usually going to be inelastic. Because even a small price change on that product will have a big impact on how much money we spend. So things like rent, people spend a lot of money on rent. If you can get even a little bit lower rent, that's going to have a nice impact on your budget. So things that have maybe a small percentage of our budget, like I rarely ever drink Coke. I just kind of don't like the taste of it. I'll have one every once in a while, but Coke or Pepsi or soda or something like that, if there's a price change for soda, I'm really not going to notice because I rarely ever consume it, and it's a very small piece of what my budget is as a consumer. The other one is time. The longer time that we have, the more elastic things will get. So hopefully over time, what we see with our demand curve for oil is it won't be like this, but as we start to develop more substitutes, it'll kind of flatten out a bit. Hopefully that happens. That might already be happening a little bit with things like solar energy and wind and different kinds of renewables. But for the most part, I think we can probably still say that oil is an inelastic product. Okay? So the elastic product, the really skinny rubber band where I hardly had to put any force on there at all, that is going to be a different looking demand curve. When we have a very small price change, right, that's our force, we'll have a very large change in quantity demanded, right? So the example I've used here is potatoes. There are many substitutes for potatoes. There are different kinds of potatoes. You could have rice, you could have bread, you could have pasta, right? There's a lot of different things you can go to for starches in this world. As far as I know, if you don't eat potatoes, you're not going to die, right? So they're not a necessity. And yeah, so for those two reasons, we can probably say that potatoes are an elastic product. So if we wanted to show that a small price change will have a very big change in quantity demanded, the slope of our demand curve is going to be very gradual and very flat. Okay, so an elastic demand curve looks something like that. Okay, so let's say we have an increase in the price for potatoes. Let's say we have a price of P1. And let's say a very small price change. Let's say the price went up by 10%. 10% increase in price. All right. From PED, we can know that the quantity demanded change is going to be much greater than 10%. So, maybe we have a 40% decrease in the quantity demanded. Okay, so that is an elastic demand curve there. Now, in terms of our PED value, our change in quantity demanded is 40, right? And our price change is 10, so the PED here is going to be 4, right? And if you have an elastic PED calculation, it's going to be greater than 1, right? And that tells you that the price change is going to be smaller than the quantity demanded change. Okay, so PED is really important. So far in the course, we've been treating all demand curves as equal. That's not true in real life. Some products are inelastic. We need a very large force to have a small impact, like our exercise band here. Whereas some products, you only need a very small force, and you can put a pretty big change on that thing, like the little skinny rubber band that I showed you. Okay, so that's PED. It's probably the most important type of PED, and it's one of the concepts we're going to refer to back as we keep covering more and more curriculum. Okay, thanks guys.